Gathering. We're an organization of individuals who prefer science and reason over religious dogma and fanaticism, serving the needs of the non-religious population of Northeast Florida since 1998. This is a transitional year for us. We're going through a period of self-examination. We're in the process of furthering our community outreach, updating our website, and creating new and exciting things we have never done before. Our website is fcfs.org, where you can go and see all of the things we've done in the past and some of the things we're getting ready to do in the future. You can join a movie review group, a book review group, Secular in the Sunday Park meetings, lots of good things, videos of previous meetings. This meeting is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to watch that once that gets up to our website. That website is beginning to go under a reorganization and a makeover. Today, well, first, is anyone here new to the First Coast Free Thought Society? If I could, Madeline, if you could be looking too, is anybody new? Show of hands. Everybody here has been here before or is familiar with us, so nobody is new. Okay, good to know. I wanted to make mention that today we commemorate Martin Luther King Jr., who, as we all know, is an icon of nonviolent social change, civil rights, equality, peace, and love. Had he lived, he would have just celebrated his 92nd birthday. Tragically, on April 4, 1968, he was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Peace and love, and he was assassinated. His legacy lives on, his work is unfinished. And speaking of unfinished work, that reminds me of the United States State Department, in particular, the U.S. Foreign Service. Our distinguished guest tonight is Richard Eason, a 32-year veteran of the United States Foreign Service who has served in various capacities around the globe, including Senior Policy Advisor to the Commanding Admiral of the U.S. Navy, 4th Fleet, based in Mayport. Mr. Eason's talk this evening is titled Inside the U.S. Foreign Service, Tales of the Unexpected. There'll be plenty of time for a conversation at the conclusion of the presentation. Should you like, you may message a question via the chat feature on Zoom. Please mute your mic, I think they're already muted, until it's time to speak, and we are recording for posterity. So let's enjoy the time and expertise that Richard Eason is offering us. Richard, we are eager to listen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. We are all yours. Take it away, Richard.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to come speak to you. I always love to promote the State Department. Sometimes I'm promoting it to people who might want to sign up for the State Department, but I'm assuming this probably isn't the case largely with this crew.
Oh, I'd love to.
Although I did have a 55-year-old school teacher in my entry-level class many, many years ago, as well as someone right out of college. So we do have amazing diversity. One thing I just wanted to comment on is that every Martin Luther King Day, I always watch his I've been to the mountaintop speech. It's what he gave the day before he was assassinated. I recommend looking at it again. It is one of the most moving speeches I've ever seen. It's easily available on YouTube. The State Department is the oldest of the cabinet departments. We actually had in a sense, we had a diplomat before we had a State Department or even a government. Ben Franklin actually served as a diplomat in London for several different states or colonies at the time. You can actually go see his home in London. I've done it. It's a very nice museum. And so he was representing this country in a sense abroad before there was even a country. The Foreign Service, the State Department is a larger organization of 20,000 employees, more or less, but of the Foreign Service officers, there are only 8,000 of us. There are more members of military marching bands than there are Foreign Service officers, which tells you something about the priorities of our government. We serve in probably about 180 embassies around the world. We're in almost every country except for the ones you can figure out we're not in, like Tehran, Pyongyang, North Korea, and a few others. we're in embassies that are where there are where there are current wars going on. That's not an unusual thing at all. It's called, we get hazardous duty pay if you go to those places, and usually it's a shorter tour. Um, but we come in, and there's only one way to be a Foreign Service officer. You have to first take a written exam, and if you pass it, then you take an oral exam. Just to use my own experience, to give you an idea of what those are like, the written exam is kind of like an SAT, but focused on sort of general knowledge of American culture, American history, politics, economics. And then if you pass that, you go to the oral. I'll talk about the oral shortly. But the year I took it, there were 17,000 people taking the written test. 2,000 people took it and passed it. And of those who took that, 2,000 of them moved on to the oral test, and only about 500 of those passed it, and about 250 actually ended up getting in the State Department. There are actually, the oral test is interesting, at least it was when I took it. You have basically a variety of things. You have oral interviews, obviously. They're done by currently serving State Department officers. There is even a negotiating session where you have all the candidates in that particular session, a class of about, I think it was about 10 or 12, who actually sit around a table negotiating. In our case, I think we were promoting a Fulbright scholar to go to the US. And so we each had different candidates, and we had to argue in favor of our particular candidate. And so that's basically how you get in. You also have to pass a security clearance, which took me 18 months for no particular reason. As you probably saw from my bio, I grew up in North Carolina and Virginia, so I didn't exactly have anything exotic. It was just they were so backed up that they were unable to catch up. You also have to pass a health clearance, and then you have to be worldwide available. You have to agree to go anywhere in the world, assuming you are to be sent there. We come in 4 different categories. Basically, we have political officers, economic officers, management officers, and consular officers. I basically have done 3 of those 4 in my career. But consular is probably the one that has the most interesting war stories, for example. They're the ones who give you your passport when you go to an embassy. They're the ones that when you go to an embassy, I hope some of you have seen an embassy, at least overseas, an American embassy. They're the ones that the lines of people are lining up every morning for their visas to the States, tourist visas, student visas, a variety of them. And so they deal with all those issues. If you lose your passport, if you get robbed, and if you get thrown into prison, we will come visit you once every 3 months. We can't get you out because it's a foreign country, and if you broke their law, we can't really do anything about that. Just don't break those laws when you're overseas. I served as a consular officer about 1.5 tours. When I was in London, I was consular officer and also the duty officer, which was horrific because there were so many Americans going through London. I would come home from work at 5, and my phone would ring nonstop, sometimes for hours straight, until the next Monday, when the embassy would be open again. And passports lost, people being arrested, people wanting to change their room because they didn't have a shower in the hotel. I mean, I can't imagine calling the American embassy for something like that. One of the more intriguing calls was it was probably at 12:30 at night. I think they think someone's sitting by the phone in the embassy. That is not the case. I was sound asleep. And this hotel manager in Wales said, I have to report, we have an American woman running up and down our halls and she's naked. And I said, well, I'm in London, so I don't really know what I can do to help you. And I said, well, you might want to contact the local authorities. Sure enough, an hour later, I got another call saying they'd arrested an American woman for indecent exposure. I never found out because the next workday, you turn it over to the arrest section. I did come close to seeing Stacy Keach because he was busted for cocaine, but he was released before I got a chance to see him. I almost got to see one of the Beastie Boys when they trashed their hotel room when they were visiting London. My favorite one is not one I was directly involved in, but it was a friend who was stationed in Belize as a consular officer. and he got a call from a town up the coast on the Caribbean, and he said, "Yeah, we have a head washed ashore, and it's an American head." And the guy said, "Well, how do you know it's an American head?" And he said, "Well, it's got really good teeth." And it turned out, yes, it was an American head. Basically, it was someone who had been buried at sea, and the body had been broken up, or I don't know, attacked by sharks or something, and the head had washed ashore. And so as a result, Belize put in requirements that if you want to be buried at sea in Belizean waters, you had to have a chicken wire thing put around the body so it wouldn't break apart. And I think you had to put weights in it so it would actually go to the bottom. But anyway, those are the kinds of things you have to deal with. I think I mentioned in my bio, I'd come home on a Friday in London from work. I happened to have the news on, and I saw there was something about an airplane crash. And so I alerted the embassy because I knew that it would be something we could be involved in the UK. And as it turned out, it was Pan Am 103. By about 11 o'clock that night, I decided I should take a shower just in case I needed to be going anywhere. And sure enough, at 11 o'clock, I just come out of the shower. I was sitting on the bed naked, basically. And they said, get to Heathrow in half an hour. It was probably about a 45-minute ride at least. But I got a taxi who got me, I got dressed first, obviously. I got a taxi there, and I was up at Lockerbie the night of the crash with the ambassador and another embassy team. Our initially, obviously, we were trying to look for survivors. There were, of course, none. And then secondarily, as a consular office, we are required to recover and control the properties of American citizens overseas to ensure that they can be returned to their and the remains as well, returned to their families in America. That's a long, involved process, but we were definitely involved in that. I was there when they brought in the first 3 bodies: a 3-year-old girl, a 6-year-old girl, a 9-year-old girl, and put them on the gymnasium floor of the in Lockerbie, in the small town of Lockerbie, and it was not an experience I would want to relive. The thing about an embassy is that you would think that it's full of State Department officers. It is not full of State Department officers. We are the minority in almost every embassy I'm aware of. There are often 30 to 40 agencies represented at an American embassy overseas. You've got the CIA, which we don't talk about, but I talked about it. You've got other intelligence agencies. You've got the military. You've got the Defense Intelligence Agency, who are the people who go out and report on the military. They're the attachés you may have heard of. And then there's the Office of Defense Cooperation. They sell American weapons to these countries, particularly the ones that are our close allies. I mean, we literally sell billions of dollars worth of U.S. military equipment overseas, probably tens of billions, hundreds of billions actually over the time. And so you've got TSA, you've got the FBI. It's called a legal attaché when it's overseas. So if we want to arrest somebody or extradite somebody from overseas, the FBI will get involved in it. We have Coast Guard actually in London. There were 5 Coast Guard officers, which I found kind of strange. But then they basically coordinate their Coast Guard type operations and recovery and drug interdiction. There's of course the DEA is everywhere, CBP is everywhere. Commerce is there as well, the Department of Commerce. I was actually served as a commerce officer regularly because I was mainly an economic officer. So my job was also to promote U.S. exports, to work with American companies overseas, to receive new companies coming to the country I was in, brief them on the economy, tell them who they should go talk to in the local government side, what the requirements were, what the legal requirements are, and to help do anything they needed to. In Jordan, when I was stationed there, we had a major, one of our companies had a major dispute with the government, and so we got involved in that directly. I would have the ambassador go talk to the relevant minister and to promote our position in that, and actually it ended up working for him. In Oman, I helped basically sell 2 Boeings to the Oman Air because they needed 2 airplanes, and they chose the Boeing thanks to our intercessions over the Airbus. Now they were leased, but they had to sell them to the leasing company for Oman to lease them. So we are directly involved in promoting jobs in the U.S. on a regular basis, but that's generally when there's a Department of Commerce officer at an embassy, that's his or her job to do that. FAA is everywhere as well. I worked with them in Singapore when I lived there. So you have many agencies, and basically any American agency in the U.S. will come up with any idea they can come up with to try to get a posting in London, because clearly London or Paris or Rome, they all want to go there. It can be very expensive to station somebody overseas, but for not surprising reasons, they want to go. Another thing we were involved with, and I was involved with that as an economic officer, was dealing with pandemics overseas. I've had, if I had been overseas, this would have been about the 5th or 6th I have dealt with. I've dealt with H1N1, H5N1, SARS, MERS, which is a disease connected to camels in the Middle East, which is also a kind of a respiratory problem. I was in Singapore when SARS broke out, and we do deal directly with the CDC. There was a CDC officer in Wuhan, China, before Trump cut the funding for that office, and he was pulled out. So it was within the realm of possibility that that disease, the spread of that disease, could have been caught in Wuhan before it went anywhere. But because we both cut the funding for that office, and Trump actually can't completely close the office in the National Security Council, who was overseeing pandemic coordination around the world. So in any event, that's merely a statement of fact. It's not a political statement. You can make whatever decision you want to based on that. In talking again about consular, we do notarials overseas. So if you want to report, if you're overseas, you're stationed there with a company, and your baby's born there, you want to register that baby as an American abroad. But also, if you need a U.S. notarial, I notarized something for Anthony Hopkins in London. There's an American who was a member of Monty Python, Terry Gilliam. My name was in his passport for 10 years because he came in for a passport, and I had to sign his passport. There were all kinds of things. Ava Gardner came in for a notarial. We're both from North Carolina, so she started talking to me about North Carolina, and we gave special treatment to her. She got to see the boss of the section took her back, and the next time she was there, I was on some other project, but she asked me, "Where's that tall Tar Heel that you had here before?" So she even asked about me the next time. But I mean, you see in London in particular, and Paris and Rome, you see all of these incredibly famous people walking by all the time. And actually, you get jaded after a while. But so it's a fascinating experience to do the consular work. It can be drudge work. The year I was in London, we came close to issuing 1 million visas. That was before we had a visa waiver established with countries that had very low fraud or problems with their visa issuance. So, I mean, Brits aren't going to stay in America for that long. They have a better healthcare system than we do, for example. Why would they? But it's countries where people would work illegally. We assume under the visa law that anyone coming to America is presumed to be an illegal immigrant who wants to work there. So they have to prove they have sufficient ties overseas that they convince the consular officer that that is not the case. One of the things when you're an economic or commercial, when an economic or political officer, your main job, you have several jobs. One, you support any senior government official traveling overseas to your country in a political economic area. I have been motorcade for Bush 1, motorcade officer for Bush 1 when he came to London in '88, I guess it was. The motorcade, you have no clue, unless you've been involved in one, how huge a POTUS trip is to an overseas country. There were 1,200 people in the presidential party coming to London for his visits there. 600 were press, and they pay their own way. But the support staff, the Secret Service, other security, communications, you name it. It's just a massive operation. They bring their own limos, multiple limos and backup limos and press cars. The embassy provides a lot of those things as well. They bring in their own helicopters for the president to move around. He's got multiple Air Force Ones that are on call if needed. And when he came to London that time, he was going to 6 other European capitals. So those same packages had to be repeated more or less in those other countries. I mean, sometimes you would move the ones from London to say Prague, if Prague was, a few steps further down the trip process. But I mean, these are massive operations, but they're very important. That's how, our president gets to have, sit down conversations with world leaders that way. Um, the motorcade was a fascinating experience in London. I don't know if you've been to London, but traffic is horrible. It's not horrible when you're in a presidential motorcade, because you have probably 10 motorcycles riding out in front. You've got 25 vehicles usually in the motorcade itself, including vans, and then a press bus or two. But you speed through central London at about 35 miles an hour at midday with no problems whatsoever. I've never seen anything like it. It's simply astonishing. Now you do that same kind of thing in other countries, but no, it's not like going through central London. It's hard to believe. When you're, as I say, when you're a political economic officer, you have a variety of other tasks as well. You're a reporting officer. Your job is to go to that country, learn everything you can about it, and write it up into cables. You will go meet with government officials. You will find anybody who has any information on the topics that you are required to pursue. When I was in Saudi Arabia, I was the oil and gas petroleum reporting officer. So I would talk to the U.S. companies operating there. I would go to Aramco. I would talk to the oil minister, actually the current energy minister of Saudi Arabia. I know personally from when I was in Saudi Arabia. He's a brother of the Crown Prince. And I remember once we were planning a meeting of the Secretary of Energy, a visit to Riyadh, and we were in a sort of a large room, and he was on one side talking to his aides in Arabic, and he looked over at me and said, "Oh, that's right, Richard speaks Arabic." And so they actually moved further away, so I couldn't hear what they were talking about in terms of their plans. But we do get the required training. For example, for the Arabic, I had 2 full years of Arabic training, full time, only learning Arabic, and it was not enough. We have 4 what we call super hard languages that we do that for: Japanese, Korean, Chinese, and Arabic. I felt more sorry for the Chinese simply because of all the characters they had to learn, but the grammar was actually easier, even with the tones, than Arabic. But we invest a lot of effort and a lot of time into this, and you have to. And I was I guess it was in Saudi Arabia, I ran into the Chinese military attaché. He spoke the best Arabic of anyone I've ever talked to, including Arabs. I mean, they put years and years and years of effort into making sure that their people can understand and speak this language in a way that is colloquial. And we have only very few people like that, and we need more of them. But how do you do that when you have 8,000 foreign service officers manning all of the embassies in the world, and quite a few of them are also stationed in Washington, having to do jobs there as well, working with the National Security Council, the whole interagency process, which basically has not been working for the last 4 years, but will be working again shortly. It's in terms of where you end up going, you do have some choice in a sense. You have to be worldwide available, but when you come within about 6 to 8 months of finishing your assignment, you will get a list of what's available. And of course, you will, 80 of you will write down London and Paris and Rome, and only one of you is going to get that particular job you're looking for. So in a sense, you've got to be looking for a job every several years, because you've got to lobby to get those jobs, or sometimes they fall in your lap. But if you know the current ambassador there, then he may ask for you in particular. But it's basically you're selling yourself constantly. And you do end up usually specializing in 1 or 2 particular regions. I did not. I chose not to, because I wanted to see more of the world, and I definitely did. When I was stationed in Singapore, I was actually not at the embassy at all. I was at the Secretariat for the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, which is kind of like an EU, a European Union for the entire Pacific Basin. And so I was traveling around from Chile to Canada to Russia to New Zealand to support these APEC meetings around the Pacific, and I loved it. It was fantastic. I was the only American at the APEC Secretariat. I worked with 20 other nationalities, the diplomats from those countries, and I really enjoyed it. It mainly focuses on economic, but that's the summit you see every year where our president is putting on some silly jacket or weird looking shirt. Basically, he's putting on whatever the locals have designed as the particular outfit for the leaders to wear at that summit meeting. But it's in 1999. I had just arrived in Singapore, and I went to my second APEC meeting in New Zealand, and that's where I first saw Vladimir Putin, who was of course still there, but he had just replaced Yeltsin. It was his first international visit, and he saw the American president at that point. So these are incredibly important for people to have, for these leaders to get together. They don't normally get together because, as I said, these POTUS visits are so massive that he's not going to be able to get to see his major issues in terms of foreign leaders or major allies unless he goes to a large meeting and can hit a bunch of them at the same time. When you have these conferences, there's always bilaterals, bilats we call them, and so the president will have bilaterals with anybody he wants to see in particular at that particular meeting, which the embassy will be involved in setting up. Now, another job for the political and economic officers is to write the non-papers, we call them, or the briefing papers for those meetings. So, when Obama is sitting there and making points, those are points that came both from embassy people, but also the whole interagency process in Washington, where the Department of Commerce wants them to try to sell some Boeings, or the CIA wants to find more information about counter-terrorist operations, and so the papers, the massive books, which apparently the current president did not read, are what a president is supposed to be accomplishing on those visits, and normally they do. I was in meetings with Hillary Clinton multiple times, and she was so on top of her brief that, I guess she was clearly a successful lawyer at one point in her career, and she covered every single point that we had put in her book for her to cover with the Belgian Prime Minister. So it's an important relationship. It's an important task for political officers to do. When Biden was in Belgium twice, meeting with the Belgian Prime Minister, I was his note taker. And so not only do you help prepare the briefing books, but after the meeting, no matter how tired you are, no matter how many hours you've not slept, you go home immediately and you write up the reporting cable. That's basically the only record of this meeting, except for whatever the other side has done. So you write that up immediately, you get it through your ambassador for clearance, it goes back to Washington, and that way all of the Washington agencies know what was discussed in that meeting. That again is something that did not happen in this current administration, especially with the Russians for some reason. And an interesting aspect of that reporting to me is that I've seen studies several times, and that you hear about these CIA major reports on terrorism or this particular country or this region. Generally, on an average of about 60% of what appears in those reports came from State Department reporting cables. I actually remember seeing the exact language I used in one of these CIA reports that I put in an oral reporting cable coming out of Riyadh. So these are the way that Washington policy-making agencies find out what's happening overseas, because we're the people on the ground. We know what's happening in the country better than basically anybody else in the U.S. government. That's our job. We also have local employees in these embassies who stay there when we're not there. They don't have the same security clearances. They're Belgians or Saudis or Emiratis, depending on where you are. But they give you continuity. They know the people to talk to. They know who to talk to at the energy ministry about their nuclear energy project, or who's the police counterpart for counterterrorism issues. And so they're able to get the newly arrived foreign service officer quickly up to speed to do their jobs and do it quickly. Because normally you're there for 2 to 4 years, and you want to get started and get moving as quickly as possible. One of the interesting aspects I've seen in my career is that when I arrived in Montevideo, Uruguay in 1985, there wasn't even a fence around the embassy. Anyone could just stroll up to the front door. Before I left, we already had a fence, and when I went back again a few years ago, there was a wall. Obviously, after the various attacks on embassies around the world, even before what happened in East Africa, we have had to close up our embassies more and more. My fear is that thanks to this recent horror on January 6th, unfortunately, our Capitol building is going to start to look like these embassies overseas, and that simply is a tragedy. It should be the people's house, but it can now not be the people's house anymore until we get this bizarre, sick radicalism out of our society. But that's what embassies have happened. That's what's happened at embassies. I mean, another point I like to make in connected with security overseas is talking about Benghazi. I always make the analogy that if a general goes to the front lines and is shot to dead by a sniper, is the Secretary of Defense responsible? My argument is no. Secretary of Defense is not responsible. That general should not have taken the risk of going to the front line. Chris Stevens should not have been in Benghazi when his actually security detail did not recommend it. This was a very unstable place. It was happening. He was a great ambassador. He believed in being out on the street. He had excellent Arabic, so he felt it was very important to connect. But it was not Hillary Clinton's fault. She had nothing to do with it whatsoever, and it drove me crazy hearing, the other party use this again and again. An ambassador is the commanding officer, the general in that country. He controls all American activities, unless he's in a place like Germany, where there's a Supreme Allied Commander of European forces. That ambassador in Germany does not control those forces. The Supreme Allied Commander does. But every other activity in that country is his call. And so when something goes badly wrong, he or she is responsible for it. And it's a tragedy that Chris Stevens lost his life, but it is by no means the Secretary of State's fault, for God's sake. She's got 180 ambassadors around the world. She's not in charge of them, and they wouldn't allow it anyway. Ambassadors, as I said, are generals, and a lot of them, well, some of them can be prima donnas and don't want to be handled like that. And you don't tell an ambassador no. When you're there, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And you follow their orders, just like a general, you do with a general. In any event, I had to get off my chest. Whenever I had that opportunity, I bring that up. Another thing we deal with overseas is when our military gets into trouble. When I had just actually taken over as acting number 2 in Abu Dhabi, when a U.S. Navy vessel, not a military vessel, but a sort of a supply vessel, was coming into the Gulf, and a fishing vessel did not respond to its warnings, and they shot it up and killed actually an Indian fisherman. This became a major diplomatic incident. I actually ended up dealing with the number 2 coming out of 5th Fleet in Manama, who came down to Abu Dhabi to talk about it. Basically, the Navy removed the ship, and its captain can no longer go to UAE because he will be arrested. These things happen pretty regularly. In some countries, we have a status of forces agreement, which would cover these kinds of incidents, but the UAE does not allow that. So you can be in trouble if you make a mess out of things in any sense, if you're in those countries without a SOFA, as they are called. So we do have those issues. We usually the military gets involved in that. In London, they were as busy with their problems as I was as a consular officer with regular American citizen problems. So it's always a headache, and it's not stuff you want to look forward to, but you do need to have people there to handle those things and to develop the relations with the local government officials so you can fix it if you can. Sometimes you can get Americans out of prison by doing a mea culpa, but generally not. These are independent, sovereign countries who have their own laws, and if you break them, you may be there for quite a while. Let me see. In terms of a career, most people, if you make it to the senior level below flag rank below the sort of the equivalent of general level, you will probably spend 25 to 30 years in the State Department. You will be moving around, pretty regularly, as often as you want to. As I said, you have some choice into where you go, but again, it's really hard to get those really nice places because most people want to be there. And you do obviously generally need the language if you're going to a place that requires that. Not all jobs require languages. Management officers, for example, don't often require it, even though they're usually running the motorcade, the motor pools as well. Riyadh, for example, had the largest motor pool in the world because both the spouses who were female and the female officers could never drive anywhere. So if they needed to go to the grocery store, or if an officer needed to go for a meeting downtown somewhere, they had to be driven. If they needed groceries, they had to be driven. They could not drive anywhere. The only place women could drive at that time was on the Aramco compound. Aramco stands for Arab American Companies. It was the 4 major US oil companies that established Aramco in the 30s and 40s. And so Aramco has its own situation. It looks like Leave It to Beaver, kind of. I mean, there's little bungalows on nice little orderly streets. The builders were very helpful in that they actually built stills into each home, so you could distill your own alcohol. We diplomats can get alcohol in these countries, including in Saudi Arabia. We had something called Uncle Sam's, which was where we would place a special order if we wanted something in particular for tea. And you'd get a call at work saying, the tea shipment is in. So you go down and pick up your tea and drive it home to your house. There was I hope it's not apocryphal, there was a great story about a British embassy saying, getting a call from Dhahran, which is on the Gulf, where most of our things from sea came to the port there. And the call was reportedly said that, I'm sorry to report, but there was an accident at the port. I'm afraid one of your crates was dropped and your piano is leaking. So you do have issues like that. I saw this myself at one of our national, every 4th of July, we have a national day, except actually in the Gulf, where it's too hot, we actually have them at a better time of year because no one wants to go to them anywhere in 120 degrees. And most of the locals have gone somewhere cooler because they can afford to and are not there anyway. But we had something at the ambassador's residence in Riyadh, a very nice place on the diplomatic quarter. There was a Saudi gentleman, I wouldn't call him a gentleman, there was a Saudi guy actually who was going around and picking up the half-drunk drinks and downing them because he wanted the alcohol so badly that he was taking half a dozen drinks that people had left on the nightstand, or not the nightstand, but on the card table or the coffee table or whatever. And he later got sick and threw up on the ambassador's couch. But we had something called Uncle Sam's, and generally when you have a diplomatic reception in a developed country, in a London or Rome, or even in Latin America, your turnout will be maybe half the people that are invited will come and show up and keep their suit on or put a dress on for that night. But in Riyadh, it was about 95%. No one wanted to turn down an invitation at the American embassy because we had booze. So that was the only place to get booze. It was also the only place you could get what was called flat-nosed beef, which is pork, because pork was also banned. For some reason, people could go for years and not eat pork. As soon as they got to Riyadh, they were dying for pork. They couldn't live without it. And some Gulf countries would have a pork room with kind of like a little speakeasy on the side of their grocery stores that expats could go in and get bacon bits or bacon or whatever they wanted, ham, but not in Saudi Arabia. And so it was nice to know exactly what percent of your invitees will come, because normally you've got to invite more than you need, because you want to have enough people to come to make it a worthwhile event. These national days are pretty fascinating things. I mean, they get to be so large that we actually have to do fundraising with local corporations to help pay for it. When I was in Oman, my representational budget was $30 for the year. You can't do much with $30. I could take, a couple of key contacts out for a lunch, and that was about it. The ambassador obviously has a larger one, but we as a government, and partly because of the U.S. Congress, don't realize what it takes to do these kinds of things. The French, whenever you have a French event, it's lavish. It's everything you want. It's great wine and champagne. When I was holding aviation negotiations in Washington, we are in charge of the bilateral aviation negotiations. So where we land, how many times we fly. When I was there, London, getting access to Heathrow was the biggest thing. It was like World War II in terms of trying to get more access for Pan Am and for our airlines, because Pan Am and TWA had those access landing slots, and they went bankrupt. And so we had to negotiate very difficult negotiations to get American United to have those slots. But I mean, so you're dealing with those issues. I was in Washington in the State Department, and when we had to host, I went to Krispy Kreme. I got 2 dozen donuts, and I cut them into quarters so there would be enough to share. That's how we have to work these things in the U.S. government. You think about wasteful government spending. It ain't the State Department, I can tell you that. I have worked in the U.S. Navy. I have worked with DoD. That's where the wasteful spending is in massive amounts. But anyway, but those are extremely important events, these representational events. My personal record was 19 nights in a row I had to go out. I can assure you that is not fun. When you work, 10, 12-hour days, you're rushing around, getting cables out, you're dealing with visitors. The last thing you want to do is stay in your sweaty suit and tie and go out to some function where you may be out until 1 o'clock in the morning and have to get up the next day, go to work by 7:30, unlike the locals who will sleep in, and then do the same thing again. So my record was 19 nights in a row, including the weekends. And I'm so happy to leave that behind, once or twice a week, maybe. But I even had 3 or 4 nights sometimes. The record we had was set by our ambassador in Kuwait, who had actually been held there when Saddam came in. Actually, my wife was in Kuwait when Saddam invaded as the daughter of a Palestinian Jordanian oil executive. There's something called a Diwania in Kuwait, which is where where a bunch of the local big shots get together and have a social thing. He got to 25 in one night. I mean, I can't imagine how you could make at least even make yourself known that quickly. But he would rush in, he would say hello to whoever the important person was, shake a couple of hands, get out, and go to the next one. And but it's very effective. People get to know you. Your whole job is to get to know as many people as possible, to be well thought of, and to be there when the minister of so and so says, "Hey, my son is in an accident. He needs to get quick medical treatment in America. What can you do for me? He needs a visa," and things like that. So I mean, these are extremely important relationships. You can have Americans arrested, or you can be dealing with all kinds of crises. I'd come into work at my aviation office. I got a call from American Airlines, and they said, "We got a problem here. We can't fly our routes that go down to South America. They're stopping us." And I said, "Well, let me check." I looked and found out we had invaded Panama, and so those air routes were closed because there was a war going on. So we get involved in all kinds of things. As I say, it's a very small organization. We also have the challenge, which you don't find in the U.S. military or the CIA or any of these other agencies, that an average of 40% of our ambassadors overseas are political appointees. They are, of course, in the nice places. You're not going to find them in Rwanda and Burundi or Dhaka, Bangladesh. You're going to find them in London and Paris and Tokyo. And so, usually they're friends of the president. There's someone who gave a lot of money to them. For example, when I arrived in Belgium, there were 5 ambassadors with their own Gulfstreams because they were so wealthy, and they were Bush appointees who were billionaires in their own right beforehand. I mean, to me, the most bizarre thing, one guy was the WorldCom guy. He was appointed to the Netherlands. I think it was WorldCom. He was actually dying and he was leaving, but he basically took all the nice, beautiful fittings off of the windows and doors in the residence and tried to put them on his Gulfstream as he was departing post for the final time, even though he was dying. And so they couldn't take off the first time. He had to unload some of the stuff from the plane and he had it shipped. And so now our Department of Security, Diplomatic Security, has to sue his estate to get back these, antique items from his residence. So, I mean, you can have people like that. You can also have Walter Mondale or Howard Baker in Tokyo. I mean, you've got some of the top politicians of America who are highly competent people who are who are great ambassadors, and then you got people like that. But I mean, it's there to me. There has to be reform in that area. There certainly, I see no problem with having some close friend of the president be appointed to one of these posts, but they should know something about foreign policy. They should know something about U.S. interests. They should know something about the country, for example. And all too often, that is not the case. Biden has sworn he's going to try to change the system. Well, I've heard that before, because when you have fundraisers, they come knocking on your door, and the politicians often feel like they have a need to do something to help them. But it's this spoils system goes back quite a while. But I'm hoping, at least there'll be a little more a rational sort of a look at who becomes an ambassador and who doesn't. You never see this with generals. And to me, an ambassador's job is just as important as any general, and in some ways more important. But in any event, that's sort of me getting up on my high horse. Let me see what else I've had. We also run a whole variety of programs. I was in charge of dealing with the PL 480 program, where we are exporting grain around the world. You can't make the best Arabic bread without winter red wheat, which is grown in the American Midwest. And so I was dealing with ensuring that these countries got the amount they needed. We are involved in all kinds of economic issues. We're involved in a huge amount of terrorist issues. As I said, I was in UK for Lockerbie, but as an economic officer, I was going in many times to alert the local government that this particular person was a terrorist, and his bank account in your bank X needed to be frozen. We would also get involved in making sure that some of these people were picked up when they were arrested and deported to the U.S. There's a huge amount of security going on. The FBI, the CIA work regularly overseas on all of these issues, as does the State Department. Another thing you should be aware of is that embassies have what is called a country team. These are the heads of all the agencies that operate in that embassy and sections, and they meet once a week under the ambassador's leadership. And that's when you sort of get your marching orders, and you also alert the ambassador of issues that you might have that he needs to be aware of in a group setting. You also, the head of the CIA station will never speak up in the country team meeting, but he has his one-on-one meeting with the ambassador because he wants to be very quiet on what he's reporting. Let me see what else offhand. We also have we support cultural events overseas. Our U.S. Information Agency, which is now called Cultural Affairs. These things are incredibly important. We have had superstars who have changed policy in a country. If you could have gotten Michael Jackson, say 25 years ago, go anywhere, you would have been the most popular person in that entire country. Our celebrity culture, which I personally detest, but so many people around the world love our celebrity culture. And so if you can get somebody to come over and do that, we also bring over professors. I remember a professor in Uruguay talking about Singapore, which I didn't know at the time I'd end up living in, saying how that in the 50s, Singapore had absolutely no industry. The only industry it had was a brewery for the British soldiers stationed there. And yet with no resources, simply location and a Confucian view of education and work, they have developed into this incredibly developed, incredibly accomplished country they have there today. So, I've always, having spent a lot of time in the Middle East and oil producing countries, in my view, oil is more of a curse than anything else. It basically holds back and distorts your economic environment, your economic development, and hence Singapore, hence Saudi Arabia. That's sort of the overall offhand. I don't know if I'd be happy to take any questions on basically any issue at this point. I don't know how we do that though.
David, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, I enjoyed your talk, and I have to get you to one of my classes this semester. I already mentioned that before. But this relates to one of the last things that you said. I can't remember exactly who it was, but about 10 years ago, I think it was Admiral Stavridis who was talking. But if it wasn't Stavridis, it was another high-ranking general or admiral. And he was actually complaining, and this was way before Trump, this was a trend that had been going on for some time, that all around the world, the American military presence is so big and so important that in many cases, local politicians, local members of government, local major business leaders would bypass the ambassadors and go to the generals or the admirals. And he said that was terrible. He said that was the fact, and he had to act like an ambassador. But really, he preferred, as an admiral, that the State Department not to be overshadowed by the military. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, no, that's very. I know Stavridis quite well, actually. That's a common. The military leadership. That's a common point of view. They don't want to be running, economic development in a country. I remember hearing a podcast within the last year about an Army captain who was sent to Iraq on his first deployment to Iraq or Afghanistan. I can't remember which one. It didn't really matter. And he not only did he have no language training, but when he got there, he didn't know there were tribes in these countries. And within 2 weeks, he was negotiating between tribal leaders in Afghanistan. State Department people can do that in their sleep. We have the languages, we know the history, we know the culture, we know the religion, but there aren't enough of us. And so, I think it was General Mattis, who said, if you don't give me more diplomats, you better give me a lot more bullets. And we can prevent these wars from happening. We develop relationships. We are on the ground. We can see things that are not good that are developing and try to deal with them, either with bringing in people who can address the issue, or providing additional economic assistance, or bringing in investments, or you name it. I mean, we're the ones who see these things, but we have to have the resources to be able to do it. And with 8,000 of us globally, spread around 190 embassies, there's only so much we can do.
Other questions? I've got a few if nobody does. Well, Richard, let me ask this, and then after my question, we'll go to somebody else with a question. Based on your expertise and your 32 years in experience, you've served under a lot of different Secretary of States. Do you go back as far as James Baker?
Oh yeah.
Do you go back further than him?
Well, I actually came in government in '78, but I came in the State Department in '84. So Baker, he's he did not rely as heavily on the expertise in the State Department as I would have thought he should have, but he was a fantastic Secretary of State. He and his president made historic achievements for this country.
Mm-hmm. So here's my question. Based on the particular Secretary of State in position at the time, do you notice a difference in how people on the ground react to you in the foreign countries that you have served based on who the Secretary of State is?
Well, yeah, but it's also partly the president. I was in Belgium when the transition from W to Obama happened, and boy, that was wonderful to be there in that direction and not to be there in the reverse. They were so happy to see President Obama and the expertise and knowledge that administration brought in, and that goes to the ambassadors. I'm sorry, but these last two secretaries of states are competing for the worst in American history, in my view.
You mean Pompeo and Rex Tillerson?
Yes, and even though I worked with ExxonMobil directly when I was in Saudi Arabia, I met his predecessor, but he was a green eye shades ExxonMobil guy who didn't know anything about, strangely, he didn't know anything about how to deal with other countries, and he basically didn't even deal with his own bureaucracy. He basically ended up slashing large numbers of the experts in the department, basically firing them for no particular reason. I guess he thought he was saving money, but you don't get rid of someone who has been in the State Department for 35 years and speaks 5 languages and knows a number of heads of state. Another point I want to make is that we also are involved in what's called the International Visitor Program, in which we choose up and coming officials from the country we're in. We recommend them for specific 3 to 4 week programs in America. If someone may want to go see the Supreme Court and a local and a state court level, or someone may want to learn about agriculture or whatever. And so we provide the opportunity, and we actually run those programs in America. And I can't tell you how many foreign ministers I have found who were in those programs. In addition, you've got many who went to American universities. They look back on their university years like most of us, through this rose-colored lenses. So we have the advantage. Not only do they have a great view of America from having come here as an education, but they usually have perfect English on top of it. So, those are real benefits for us, and I'm afraid that's fading away, particularly, with the anti-Muslim ban, with anti-immigration policies. I mean, the next generation of diplomats, maybe in 10, 15 years, aren't going to have the benefits that I did of dealing with diplomats who know our culture, know our history, and know our language.
Is it true that war is a failure of diplomacy?
That's sorry?
Is it
Oh yeah,
true?
well, I would think so. I mean, in some cases, war is needed, but I mean, we haven't won a war since World War II, in my view. I don't count Panama. I don't count Grenada. These are tiny little police actions that you could send a couple of Boy Scout troops to fix. We are doing these things. We are sending Army captains to Afghanistan to try to deal with issues that have been there for 2,000 years, cultures that have been, like this in Afghanistan, the Pashtun and the Uzbeks, and they don't know anything about it. They don't have a clue. They don't know about Islam. They don't know, Bush apparently, Bush 2, after 9/11, when we were already going into Afghanistan, he decided to go into Iraq without realizing that Iraq is a majority Shia country headed by a minority Sunni, Saddam. And so what happens if you take out Saddam? You basically hand the country over to Iran next door, which is a country of 80 million people and a whole lot more potential, a whole lot more influential than Iraq ever was. And so, I mean, you have these kind of idiotic decisions, in my view, that are made because people aren't talking to the experts. The military was appalled by the invasion of Iraq. The CIA of the working level was appalled by it. Anyone who knew the region was appalled by it. Everyone knew that Al-Qaeda and Saddam had nothing to do with each other. Al-Qaeda, bin Laden hated the secular Muslims, and he blew them up on a regular basis. I mean, it's we've made such horrible problems, such mistakes, and we keep throwing the military at it. Don't throw the military at every problem in the world. Use the FBI, use Interpol, use cultural issues, use economic assistance. To me, you could have taken a couple of really good CIA officers with 10 billion in cash, dropped them into Afghanistan, and you wouldn't even have had to fight that war. You just buy off a few warlords, and you would have saved all those lives. But I wasn't president, so I wasn't able to make that call.
You understand this. Why don't they?
They are politicians. Bush was the governor of Texas. Big guns and cowboys and all of that. I mean, I was actually having a discussion group earlier today making reference to Rick Perry, who in his debate decided, I want to get rid of 3 government agencies, education, energy, and what's that third one?
That was hilarious.
I mean, one of the most hilarious developments in politics in American history in the last 20 years, I think. I
Mhm.
mean, he was obviously so full of BS that he didn't have an agenda. He was just trying to play to the peanut gallery.
Are there anybody else with other questions? I've got a bunch. Fred, go ahead.
Hey, well, a couple of comments. First about the going on with Iraq. Whether you think that George H.W. Bush really kind of, or his diplomat in Iraq kind of hinted to Saddam, oh, we don't care if you invade Kuwait, go ahead. And then,
Yeah, she was the acting DCM, and I agree that I don't think she was strong enough, but then she shouldn't have been put in that position anyway. It should have been made clear at a much higher level of what our U.S. position was, and I don't think Bush had decided then anyway. Maggie Thatcher had to basically get his spine, straight up in dealing with it. I remember before Trump was elected, our commander in Korea basically made a point that very clearly that if Kim Jong-un were to do anything with nuclear weapons against U.S. interests, there would be a major issue with Pyongyang. MAD worked for many, many years, mutual assured destruction with the Soviets. You just make clear to the North Koreans that if you do anything, then you will lose part of your country. And it's the same thing with Tehran. I mean, we have to come up with a modus vivendi with Iran. It is a country of 80 million people sitting across the Gulf. You can almost see it from Oman, where I've been in the tip up there in the Strait of Hormuz. And you have to deal with it. To me, the JCPOA was fantastic. It put off Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons for 15 years. It put inspectors on a regular basis in Iranian facilities. Yes, it wasn't perfect. Yes, it didn't deal with the terrorist issues, but that was for the next stage. This way, we were preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon, and now they are probably 6 to 18 months away from having one if they want it. I mean, it was the dumbest thing I've ever seen to do that, to throw that away. Plus, we threw Russia, China, the European Union, Germany, Britain, all of our allies who were in that same agreement under the bus. But again, what can you do when a president makes what you think is an idiotic decision? When you're in the government, you just say, yes, sir.
We have a question in our chat room here, or whatever it is. It comes up from Jeanette. She's asking, which presidents did you serve under, and how did the policies change from president to president? And we have to be out of here by Thursday.
Well, the thing is, you serve the president. The president is your boss. If you are asked to carry out a policy you cannot carry out, then you simply resign. That's just the way it is for any government position. I came in, I was working under Carter, but I was at the education department before I got in the Foreign Service. I came in the State Department under Reagan. I was at a lower level in the department. You're not involved in much of anything that will make you upset with the president. I mean, you're so far down in the bureaucracy that you're just seeing a tiny piece. You're the tiniest blind man touching the elephant, trying to figure out what's going on. So you deal with, you continue up your progression of your career. When you get into higher level policy decisions, that's when you come to making those kinds of choices. We had a fantastic head of PDAS, a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, which is the deputy of our Latin American Bureau. An incredible man. He served in multiple posts in Latin America. He knew all the leaders. He spoke perfect Spanish. He could quote, Octavio Paz novels, from memory. This man was astonishing. He was rewarded after being PDAS in our Latin American Bureau with the ambassadorship in Panama. You started out, you had a great time. Trump came in and basically he could not stand to work for him because this was his anti-immigration, the racist rapists coming up north through Central America. The same thing happened with our former Assistant Secretary for Latin America, who was our ambassador to Mexico. They just couldn't stand, they couldn't represent an administration that was saying these kinds of things in the countries in which they were stationed. And so they resigned, many people resigned. As I say, Tillerson fired quite a few people with incredible experience, incredible expertise, who knew probably a lot of these leaders. I mean, I know people who are in charge of things. In my own, for example, my own government, I know the new guy who's going to be the deputy of the CIA because I worked with him on counterterrorism financing. And so when you spend enough time in these careers, not only do you get to know everybody who's going to be of any importance in the US government, but you get to know them in foreign governments. I mean, if you want to find out what's happening in a certain country, you talk to somebody who was the political counselor there 10 years ago, because he probably knows so-and-so who's now the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that is as good as gold, because diplomacy is also relationships, just like anything else. Just like, selling a car to somebody is a relationship, or, putting in a new air conditioning system. You build relations, or between people, and that's what diplomacy is. It really bothered me that our assistant secretary for a region was sort of the counterpart of a military commander for that. For like CENTCOM, the equivalent would be our Middle Eastern assistant secretary. Our Middle East assistant secretary would travel with an aide. The CENTCOM commander would come in on a 737 with basically, brigadier generals carrying his briefcase, and a bunch of colonels running around, doing everything else. And it again gets into that what it looks like, that you need the State Department should be seen as the main conduit for these kinds of conversations, not the military, because we don't want the military to be involved in all these things. As I say, we haven't won a war since World War II. And the military coming in with their massive presence all the time, and they would of course come in every 3 or 4 months. An assistant secretary probably had one trip in his 2-year tour to go to his various posts. So I mean, we don't devote the resources we need to this. So of course we have all these wars, because we don't have enough diplomats at least trying to cut them off before they get to that point.
What do you think is a greater threat to our system of governments? Does it come domestically or from foreign entities?
Well, until recently, I would have said foreign entities, but at the moment, I mean, I think to me, it's very clear that our domestic security agencies have downplayed white supremacy and racial, these kinds of radicals to a great extent. I mean, it's hard to believe after Oklahoma City. Even going back to MLK, I mean, he was killed by a white or racist radical. We are not focusing enough of our domestic resources on dealing with these issues, and they have killed far more people than Muslim terrorists since 9/11. It's not even close. And so we put these models up that, oh my God, it's the Islamic terrorists, and meanwhile we've got white racists storming our Capitol and killing people behind us. We need to be dealing with both of them. And clearly the State Department's job is not to deal with any of these domestic issues in that sense.
Do you think the State Department can recover from the Trump years?
It's going to be hard. I mean, you need 15 to 20 years to develop a moderately capable diplomat. He or she has to have served in multiple posts. He or she has to have the languages, the expertise. I had a year of economic training as well to bring me up to the level of economic that I needed to be. I basically ran the free trade agreement we had with Jordan when I was there. And you need to have that kind of expertise among people. You can't have somebody who's been in only 5 years, do that kind of thing. I would have the justice minister or the trade minister in Jordan call me on the phone on a regular basis. I mean, that's the way these things work. You develop those personal relationships, again, as I mentioned before, but it's going to take quite a while. And we haven't even had the intake of the junior officers that we need to keep our numbers up. So it's, I'm confident we will get there. We've had ups and downs before, nothing like this down, but there's a lot of good people out there. There are a lot of knowledgeable people. One thing I found particularly intriguing was in my time after 9/11, all of a sudden I would start seeing a lot of South Asians in the State Department. And I got to know a few really well. And I said, I don't understand this. It wasn't a discrimination thing, but all of a sudden I'm seeing South Asians all over the place in the State Department, officers, many, many posts. And a couple of them explained to me, well, you know, it used to be that our parents wanted us to be doctors or lawyers. Well, now they're willing for us to be State Department officers because they have put that post 9/11 on a pedestal as well. And so, no, that's fantastic. And we need to keep that going. We need to bring in diversity. We have certainly have had diversity in our secretaries of state, women, African Americans. Colin Powell was phenomenal. The thing I most liked about him was he brought this incredible leadership talent from DOD to the State Department. You know, the first foreign trip a president makes is usually to Mexico. And usually what happens is that the assistant secretary for Mexican affairs, or for Latin America actually, goes over to the White House, gives a briefing to the president. Powell said, no, we're not doing that. Give me the 6 Mexico desk officers who are third or fourth tour officers, and I'm taking them over to the White House to brief the president. I'm sorry, but that is gold. Not only does the president get the best information, because these are the people who know the ins and outs of our policy and our history with Mexico, but those people are going to be loyal to the State Department and to Colin Powell for the rest of their lives. They're never going to forget that. And that's how you build esprit de corps. You don't go shouting at somebody. You don't point fingers when something goes wrong. You do what Colin Powell did, and he was a fantastic leader.
Other comments or questions?
I'd like to make a comment on the, you can say about war being a failure of diplomacy. Sometimes there is actually no way for diplomacy to work, because both sides have to be willing to engage in diplomacy,
Right.
And the request had to be reasonable. Like okay, President Polk, he was saying, I want all this land from Mexico because
Yes.
we don't want to give you land. Well, I'm going to start a war. There was no way to Mexico to negotiate with Polk and with Hitler in Poland. Hitler said, I want half of Poland. I'm going to split it with Stalin. Poland said, well, wait a minute. We don't want to divide our land. Well, we're going to take it anyways. How could you negotiate with that?
You can't. I definitely agree. But I mean, we have been throwing the military at everything. I mean, to me, one of the most ridiculous things was the global war on terror. How can you have a war on a tactic? You will never wipe out terrorism in this planet. And to me, the drones taking out several thousand jihadis around the world, they're creating many, many more than that. You don't think the sons of that guy we just took out in Afghanistan or Yemen are going to be furious at America and end up going to very Islamic schools and come under the influence of future jihadi groups? Of course they are. It's happened again and again throughout history. I mean, we need to be using our brains when we send in our military, not just immediately turn to them on every single occasion as we have done for decades. And this is not a Democrat thing, it's not a Republican thing, it's an American thing. And we need to learn to do it a different way because it ain't working.
Comments, questions from other folks? Anybody who hasn't spoken that wants to make a question or a comment? If not, I've got a bunch.
Okay, there's somebody over here. Steve,
Steve?
he's got to
Go
unmute
ahead.
though.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I have a question that you just spoke about the drone wars.
Yeah.
Now I heard, I don't know if this is true, but George Bush the second used to meet with who is it, Brennan or Brenner, the guy with the drone who started the drones.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure who did that first. Both DOD and CIA did.
He was. I thought he and Bush too. They put these so-called terrorists on the list, and then would have the drones kill them. And then Obama continued that program.
Yeah.
And he in fact escalated it, right?
He did.
And also upped the amount of what do you call it, collateral damage. Like Bush too allowed for 10 innocent people to be killed for every terrorist they targeted, but
that's probably accurate.
Obama increased it to 20.
No, I agree. I mean, I am not a fan of the drones.
I mean, I don't know if it's true, and I assume that what was on WikiLeaks was true because they didn't charge Assange with lying. They charged him with leaking secrets.
Right. Yeah. Don't look me up on WikiLeaks, by the way.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
I will now.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I hate Julian Assange, and I also hate the other guys who release
Snowden.
these things. You know, I was one of my key contacts in Belgium was this guy in their central bank, and I got a lot of inside information about the European Union was going to do in terms of exchange rates and all kinds of things. And then he was outed via WikiLeaks. He almost lost a job he was going to get at the ECB, the European Central Bank, because of what he was talked about. It was all over the Flemish language press on the front page that this poor fellow had been talking to the American embassy, and it was in the reporting cables. I learned then never to use names again in a cable, even at a very high security level, because you never know what's going to happen. And of course, you know, the person, what was this, Bradley, what was his name? Can't remember his full name, but he's the guy who is a military officer who gave up all of this information in millions of State Department cables. So, you know, it's very frustrating because the whole point of after 9/11 was they wanted these security related agencies to work more closely together and share information. Well, you can't do that when you got bad apples, you know, basically downloading everything and giving it to WikiLeaks or whoever. So it's extremely frustrating. It's very difficult to, you know, to coordinate as we should be doing as a government when you have these kinds of major flaws, major problems.
Mhm. Other comments or questions? Was the other person you were trying to think of Edward Snowden?
Yeah, Snowden, and also
Bradley Channing.
Bradley, what was his name?
Wasn't
The one
it
he changed
Channing?
sexes as well.
Channing Channing.
Yeah, Chelsea now. That's right.
Yeah,
Channing.
he changed his name to her now. You know,
Right.
that's a whole big thing. This is just a question of procedure. You referenced something earlier about when sometimes you get a request to bump a visa up or get a visa for an important dignitary, and they come to you or one of your colleagues, and they want service right away, and that's the importance of relationships. So when you get that request, what do you actually do? Do you sneak into the office and stick the request on the top of a pile?
No.
How does that work?
Well, no, you hope you've made a good relationship with a consular officer who has the authority to do that. You don't do that for everybody. You're not going to do that for some, you know, your maid's cousin who wants to go to Disney World. It's got to be a senior U.S. government official. There has to be a policy reason to get somebody out of bed and go in on a weekend to the embassy to issue this thing. You know, visas are a very complicated process these days. It used to be just this little thing with an arm, and I'd put a plate in with the right number, and you go ka-chunk, and you pull out the passport with a new stamp. Now they're incredibly complicated, computer generated, and nobody who is not a consular officer trained in that equipment could possibly do that. And plus, you don't want to have fraud. You don't want to have. I had a boss before I arrived in Uruguay. The predecessor of my boss when I arrived ended up being arrested in Madrid for selling visas to Iranians for $5,000 a pop. So not only did he lose his pension, but he got to enjoy 5 years in a U.S. prison. So you have to watch out for those kinds of frauds.
Carolyn has a question or a comment.
Hi, by the way, I'm a guest of Jane, so thank you for inviting me to come here, Deb. I have a question. I just was reading today the rankings of first ladies as they compared to presidents. And you obviously had a lot of families in each of these posts you were in. So what was it like for the families in the post? Because in many cases, they are also ambassadors, are they not, for the United States?
Oh yeah, and certainly anybody at an embassy is in a sense an ambassador because they deal with local people on a daily basis. And, you know, you can be sent home by, you know, the American ambassador in that post if you do something that you shouldn't be doing. You know, for example, I know people who've had affairs inside embassies who the ambassador, who it becomes an issue or public, and they are gone. If you, have a car accident and you run away from the scene, well, actually it depends on what country. In some countries you're supposed to because you may be torn to shreds by the locals going to the crash site. But you know, you're under the authority of the ambassador. You know, I still have the photograph. I've remarried, but when we arrived in Saudi Arabia, my 14-year-old daughter and my wife, I have a picture of them in their abayas taking their passport photos for their residence card photos for Saudi Arabia. They looked incredibly unhappy because they were going to be in Saudi Arabia for 2 years. They would not be able to drive. They'd have to wear the abayas whenever they went off the diplomatic quarter. And my teenage daughter would not be having anything remotely like the life of an American teenager. But then, we also moved to Singapore. She had a fantastic time there. It's one of the best high schools in the world, and it's covered by the government because you're sent there. And so they cover those kinds of costs. So, I mean, I wish I had grown up overseas. I mean, yes, you were evacuated occasionally. There's civil war in your case. I mean, yes, you're there when 60 people are killed in 3 Al-Qaeda attacks on hotels in Jordan, like I was. But there is nothing like a foreign service life. Either as a child, the kids grow up. They're so much more mature. They're so much more accepting of cultural differences. You can put any 15-year-old foreign service kid in almost any setting, and they will manage. They will develop a conversation with whoever is there, whether it's a Sri Lankan gardener, or a Russian ambassador. I mean, they are the most adaptable people you will ever see. And foreign service officers develop that skill, as an adult. But it's a fantastic life. That's all I can say.
Okay. Bud Emerson, I think you have something you wanted to ask. Unmute yourself, Bud. Bud. Unmute.
Still muted.
We can't hear you, Bud. Push the space bar or click the mute button on the.
As I said, I don't do American Sign Language.
Yeah, not many people do. Started in France. Isn't that interesting?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Bud, you're still muted. Oh,
No,
there you go.
now
Now you're good. Go ahead, Bud.
I was poking on the microphone instead of the sign. I don't see very well, I guess. Anyway, my question is just personal, and I don't want to interrupt any if somebody else has got questions. But it's always been my opinion that the Iraq War was really over a family feud. In that it's my understanding that Saddam had taken a shot at Bush Sr. and that is really to get even with him was really what the Iraq War was about. Do you have any feelings about that? Is that my imagination?
I mean, I don't have any more inside information than you would. That's clearly only something that George W. Bush knows. But I know he was surrounded by neocons who were chomping at the bit to take out Saddam. Regardless, they actually once we took down Saddam, they were wanting to move on to Syria immediately. That would have worked well. That's what really frustrates me about the talk, the saber rattling against Iran. Iraq was a country of 25 million people, and we failed miserably in bringing stability, economic growth to that country. And we basically made it so that Iran has the most influence of any foreign country in that country. Iran is a country of 80 million people. Do we really think that we are going to be able to achieve regime change or political stability in a country of 80 million people, a country that's been there in a stable regime for 2,500 years? They remember Cyrus the Great. They remember being kicked in the butt by Alexander the Great. I mean, they are very proud, very well educated, very culturally confident people. And so the thought that we could take them on and do anything to change their direction is impossible. The only way to do it is to work through diplomacy, is to work through economic exchanges, cultural exchanges. I'd love to go to Tabriz or Isfahan. I love the architecture of Iran. In Abu Dhabi, their embassy was right next to ours. It was an incredibly beautiful building. I hate the regime. They do terrible things, but we have to deal with them. I guarantee you that that the vast majority of the population under 40 doesn't like those guys either. And so we have to deal with some way in which we can deal with them and the bazaris, the private sector, who are incredibly influential in our country, and come up with a modus vivendi with them. There is no choice. It is too major a country, as I say, 80 million people. The UAE has 8 million people. Saudi Arabia has about under 30 million people. I mean, the Middle East is bracketed by Egypt and Iran, who are basically about the same size. Everybody else is a minor player. And so anyone dealing with the Middle East has to deal with both of those countries. You've got to come up with some way of dealing with them, or you're in trouble.
Okay. Bud, do you have a follow-up, or does that answer your
Well, I
question?
do, but it's a very personal thing, and I don't
Go
want
ahead.
to. I would like to ask a question, but I don't know if
Well, he
can
can
I ask
say
him?
no. You
Go,
can
go,
ask,
go.
ask
Okay.
the question.
When I was a kid, I was in the military, and we won a entertainment contest, and one of the few things that we had a choice over was whether we were going to come back to the United States or not. Two of us had wives. The other boy's wife, her father had been an SS officer, but my wife's was clean. But the point is, if we won, if we went to the if we accepted to go to the United States and we won, we would get out of the army sooner. And we were bad soldiers. We were sorry soldiers. We wanted out. We were all college graduates that drafted, and we were in a military band because of that. So anyway, we agreed that we would come back if they could get the visas through for our wives, and they said that'd be no problem. Well, we went to the consulate, and they said come back in so many months, and that wouldn't do because we needed to be in America by then. So we go back to the military and tell them our problem, that we weren't going to go. We weren't going back to America if we couldn't get our visas. Anyway, he picked up the phone and called the consulate. And he says, you go back over there. And we go back over there, and yeah, they took care of us. So how many questions do you get like that? That that the Army pulls, in other words, somebody pulls something like that, because they got our visas. There was no problem, but we went through that several times.
Well, I mean, there, as I say, one year in London, and we almost issued 1 million visas. So there's a story behind each one of those things, and I certainly have no way of knowing them. My wife actually is Palestinian Jordanian, born in Kuwait. She was there when Saddam invaded. She was 15. She worked as a candy striper under the occupation for a while, and after a couple of months, I think it was, she and her mother and brother fled across Iraq to go to Jordan for the first time. She'd never lived in Jordan, but she had a Jordanian passport. So I mean, you've got those kinds of stories. I met her in Jordan, and we got married a few years later. I was in Belgium at the time, but just in connection to Belgium, there's a story I always love to tell. In the 19 teens, I guess it was, there were pogroms in Ukraine and in Russia. And there was this Jewish man who decided to leave. He wanted to go to America. Very hard for him. He went all across Europe. He went to Belgium. He got on a ship to Belgium. He went to New York. He decided, oh, it's really too crowded here. I want to go somewhere else. He ended up in St. Louis. Started working, made some money, brought his wife, who was still in Eastern Europe, over, and daughter. And then when they were there, they had a son. That son grew up. When he was young, he bought his first company, put it in a better management, bought another company, ended up buying 100 more, became a billionaire. His mother and daughter had left the port of Antwerp on the Red Star Line for America to meet the husband and father. And then 70 years later, that boy came back as the American ambassador to Belgium. To me, that says everything about America. In America, everything is still possible, and that's one of the best things about it. And that's why you don't see long visa lines outside of the Russian embassy or the Chinese embassy or any of these other embassies in any capital of the world. They're outside the American embassy.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Other comments or questions? Fred, I see you've got your hand. Go ahead, Fred.
I'd comment, my dad served in the Navy. He was in 27 years, and I spent a few years in Japan while I was a young child and began school there. And also joined the Navy myself and spent 2 years in Greece from 95 to 97.
Mhm.
And my other brothers also served in the military. My one brother is a satellite specialist in the Air Force. Comment is, now, when I was in Greece, I served first with the Master at Arms and with the NCIS. And one thing they did with the NCIS, of course, they had to investigate any serviceman who's getting married to a foreign national.
Right.
They had to do investigations. And curiously, none of the women they're getting married to, it was mostly men getting, American men getting married to foreign women.
Yes.
None of the locals, they're always from somewhere else, some other part of Europe or another part of Greece, because the local people were very clannish. But also we had incidents where a Master at Arms second class, he took a moped and for a joyride and flew it into the harbor. He got back on base, went to the barracks, and the Greek police came looking for him. Said, "Oh no, I've been here the whole time." Another Master at Arms had been out in town, and she saw it. She said, "Nope, he was there." And but the NCIS officers I was there with when they were discussing with them his options, saying, "You have a possibility to go into a Greek jail, and
Yes.
someone else is going to have to bring your food to you because they don't provide food for you, or you
Right.
can pay $3,000 to the family so they can get a new moped." And now, at the same time, in the Stars and Stripes, I remember an article about this outrage in Okinawa, where there are a lot of U.S. military bases in Okinawa because, well, the Japanese, they look upon Okinawa as the little stepsister they adopted because, Okinawa had used to be an independent kingdom
Right.
until the Japanese Empire took it. But this U.S. serviceman had raped an Okinawan woman, and then they managed to conveniently get him out of the country before he could be held for charges against his crime, but there's probably no doubt that he committed the crime. But it's a question about as to not just servicemen, but also members of the diplomatic corps that commit crimes in other countries and how they're held accountable or allowed to get away with it and
Right.
not held to account by either the host country or the U.S. at all.
No, it's a major problem. I mean, we actually had a case in the last few years where I think again, it was a military spouse in London who just arrived there. She was driving on the wrong side of the road, killed a British person because, she was on the wrong side of the road. And they basically whisked her out of country quickly. That's horrible for our relationship. That kind of thing happens enough, and you're going to have major restrictions on any American based in those countries. They may, not Britain, but they may break relations with a country over these kinds of things. There have been many rapes in Okinawa by American military people. It's a major issue, and that's why, you need to have the American authorities deal with these in the best ways possible, and not just whisk them away and not face any retribution. I mean, if they're taken to the U.S. and then tried, and then the foreign country sees that they are serving time in prison, that's maybe a possible option, but letting them get away is just simply horrible.
We have a comment or something from Jeanette. Jeanette, are you there?
I'm here. I wanted to just share something really quick and possibly there might be a question that's pinned to it. My oldest daughter, I was married to a man who was in the military. We were stationed in Italy, and right about an hour out of Venice. And my oldest daughter was born in Italy, and we had to have her denationalized. And which involved a trip to I think it was an embassy. It was an absolutely gorgeous building. But it may have been I don't remember, to be honest with you. We were in a place called Vicenza, Italy. And she had her Italian birth certificate, which is absolutely gorgeous. And then her denationalization papers, which had to go through the American embassy. And we had to have all of that done before we could actually come back to the United States with her. And it was just, that was an interesting ordeal to go through. But the building itself did have Americans working in it that
Oh, yeah.
helped us through the process. So I mean,
Well, yeah, most large countries have not only American embassies, but they have consulates. Even in the
oh,
U.S.
that's what it was. It was a consulate. That is
Yeah.
what it was.
No,
You're right.
some-
You're right. You're
It's
right.
sometimes confusing because you can have a consulate in Florence, but you can also have a consulate just doing consular work in the consulate.
Nope,
So,
nope,
you
nope.
know,
It just hit me
outsiders
like
don't
a
quite
bolt of
understand
lightning.
that. If I'm in
Yes.
Venice, I'm going down to the consulate, that means I'm going to the consular section for some issue. But it's in the consulate because that's not the embassy, it's the consulate. There's a consul general or consular officer in charge of that consulate, reporting back to the embassy in whatever the capital is.
Wow.
Thank you. It did hit me like a bolt of lightning when you said that. I thought, oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's where we had to travel to. So,
and unfortunately,
okay.
I mean, it's taken a while for our foreign policy to adjust. For example, we had many more diplomats and multiple consulates in Germany and like 3 in India. So a country of 80 million versus 1.1 billion. We need to adjust these things to make them more reflective.
Let me append one additional funny story now that you mentioned that. I went into labor at 7 months, and the little concern that we were posted at did not have the capacity for a premature baby. So I was medevaced by one of those huge airplanes to Frankfurt, Germany. They had a huge military hospital there. And as we were going over every country, they said, if you have the baby now, she'll be Austrian. If you have the baby now, she'll be Swiss. And it was kind of an ordeal. I was going, oh my gosh. The whole flight there. So anyway.
That reminds me of a somewhat a story with a similar issue in the sense that, when Obama came in, the new Belgian government wanted to make friends with the new president because they had not gotten along well with Bush. And so they agreed to take one of our Guantanamo detainees that had Belgian connections. And so I was involved in that whole process. Of course, I got his record, the case that had been built up against him. It was about 3 pages in a tiny little file. Basically, nothing had been done during the 7 years he'd been held in Guantanamo to come up with any kind of valid legal case against him. But anyway, I go to the airport. There's a C-5, which is a massive plane. It rolls up on the tarmac. I was in charge of receiving him on the plane because the Belgians refused to receive him in shackles. And that was how we transferred. I go on the plane. He is strapped like Hannibal Lecter to this major metal chair in the middle of the C-5, this massive cavernous entrance, just with his chair sitting there, his metal chair bolted to the floor. And so they unshackle him. I shake his hand and walk off. He'd been a driver for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. I mean, there was no reason he should have been kept this long, but I handed him over to the Belgian. He had some mental issues and, they kept some track of him, but I mean, a lot of people have mental issues. So we were trying to close Guantanamo for a variety of reasons. It's a terrible PR, just like, Abu Ghraib was for us. And, it's still, unfortunately, it's still there. Didn't help that the U.S. Congress refused to allow any of them to be transferred back to U.S. prisons.
Well, David, go ahead. Unmute, David. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what Jeanette said reminded me of something which raises a question because when my son was born, my wife and I were living in Israel, and so we had to have him registered as an American citizen. And we went to the American consulate in Jerusalem, which was in East Jerusalem. It wasn't in West Jerusalem. So it was in the Palestinian part of Jerusalem, which, struck me. And I was wondering if that was a deliberate choice, since the embassy was in Tel Aviv, clearly in Israel. This was before the transfer. but it was also, it occurred to me that that might have been a nod towards the Arab side of the conflict in order to sort of burnish our credentials as an honest broker in dealing with the Israeli-Arab conflict.
Yeah,
But it-
basically, I mean, we did not recognize officially the occupation of, the occupied territories.
Right.
So that's been there. That was basically in effect our embassy to the Palestinians.
Right.
It did not report to the ambassador in Tel Aviv. It reported to the Middle East Bureau back in Washington.
Oh, I didn't know that.
However,
That's interesting. That's
Trump
interesting.
changed that when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem
Yeah.
without getting anything in exchange. I mean, the Israeli conservatives in particular have been pushing for this for decades, and we would have considered if there was some meaningful two-state agreement that came out of it, we would consider that as on the table as part of the discussions. But Trump, the great negotiator, just handed it over for nothing.
Yeah, well, that was a fiasco. But I was curious about the status of the American consulate in East Jerusalem. That was an interesting situation.
Thank you, David. Well, Richard, you've said it all.
I probably have.
I don't think, I mean, but I do have, I could talk with you, Richard, and I think we could enjoy a conversation among all of us for the next 3 hours. But we have to go on and we have to let you go on. But before we go, what I'd like you to, well, I'd like everybody to unmute now. If you can hear me, please unmute. But before you go, Richard, can you explain to us what we should do as an average American citizen relative to the State Department? Is there anything we can do to help? For example, the Peace Corps promotes that. Is that a worthwhile organization in your idea?
Definitely, I worked with them overseas as well. In certain countries, obviously, they're in the less developed countries. I mean, if you run into your congressman, say it's important for us to have a reasonable foreign affairs budget. We need to be promoting our programs like this international visitor program or funding for the State Department. I liked Baker a lot, but the one thing I didn't like about him is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, we had to open up more than 20 new embassies throughout the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. And because of Baker's personal political, I don't know, maybe ambitions, he asked for no additional money from the US Congress. I heard from Congress people that he could have easily waltzed up there and gotten additional funding for all of these new embassies and staff them and all of that, but he chose not to for his own political agenda. But I mean, we can use resources. You can get involved in this. There's someone in town, I actually haven't had direct contact with him. I met them once, who runs these international visitor programs, bringing in these foreign officials or foreign students to have an experience. Sometimes they live in an American home. I remember in Jordan, there was this radical imam who we got to participate in one of these programs. He ended up going to the States. I think it was in Denver, maybe, or I don't know. He lived in a family for a couple of weeks, and then visited churches and religious entities in America. He came back, changed 180 degrees. He no longer had a radical view of America. He saw that Americans were normal people. They were religious people on their own, in their own sense. And he was completely changed. It was one of the best things that we've ever spent money on. And it cost, I don't know, maybe $30,000 to bring this guy over and put him up and host him and we can do that again and again in these countries. And they will have, and that guy that imam will have a positive view of America for the rest of his life. And the more we do of things like that, it's these exchanges. So, you're meeting some foreign official here and having a conversation, a meaningful contact with somebody is fantastic. That you are an ambassador when you do that kind of thing. And so, it's not just, giving more money for the State Department. I don't get money from the State Department anymore anyway, except for part of a pension. But I mean, it's the whole, and as a professor, diplomacy is extremely important. We have a very unbalanced foreign policy in sense of this huge role of the U.S. military. We need to be focusing on the cultural exchanges. We have soft power like you can't believe it. I mean, no one wants to go to, as I say, there's no one waiting upside to go to China for, huge long lines. No one wants to live in China except for, academics necessarily. I mean, we are so popular still, despite even the last 4 years. Everybody wants to come to America. We are still the land of opportunity. We're still the place where J-Lo is. You know, we're still a place where George Clooney is. You know, we're Hollywood. We're everything. We're you know, Broadway. You know, we are what the world still looks at. Sometimes I wonder why with some of the things we're doing. But you know, this is the country anybody in the world wants to come to if they could.
That's very true statement. David, you want to close us out go
Well,
ahead.
I was just going to write on something that Richard said. You know, at UNF, being a professor at UNF, there were several times where the State Department, I think it was USAID, in fact, brought groups of people. They would bring groups of doctors. They would bring groups of people who worked in public administration. Once I met with a group with some other professors who were journalists, and you know, they were asking us all sorts of questions. And I even, you know, made some contacts with a Slovenian journalist when I went to Slovenia. I met with him there, you know, and that hasn't happened in the last 4 years. I can tell you that.
That was not AID. That was the International Visitor Program run by the State Department. That's exactly
Okay.
what it described.
I knew it was state, but I thought it was USAID, but maybe it was IVA. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, that's really great because you can tell by the questions that some of them ask that they really don't have a good idea about America.
Exactly. That's the whole point of bringing them
and
here.
that's the whole point of bringing them. And they'll go to UNF, and they'll go someplace in Milwaukee, and they'll go someplace in Sacramento, and sometimes you make a personal contact, but it just changes. They understand a little bit better, you know.
And, you
and
know,
not that everything we have is perfect, but
right.
everything we have is much more normal than people believe.
And the more we do of that, the more we benefit. When I was in Oman from 92 to 95, you know, right across from Iran in the Persian Gulf, or actually on the Indian Ocean, the #1 rated show was Baywatch. Well, we don't want Americans think America is Baywatch. It is not. And actually, Pamela Anderson is Canadian, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we need to have them, you know, we're not this slutty country where women jump into bed at the drop of a hat, you know, like on Sex and the City or something, where you know, we're all, it's a very conservative place, this country. We're very prudish. You know, we are not, Europe is so much different than we are in terms of lifestyle and all kinds of things. So, I mean, you know, it's important. I remember, again, it's another side story. When I was in Oman, I won a raffle ticket at the American school, and I got a free ticket to Amsterdam, and my wife couldn't go. So I went. I'd never been there before, and I loved it. But the plane went from Dahran, it went from Muscat to Dahran, straight to Antwerp. I take I land in Zaventem. I take the train in to the central station. I walk down the street, and the first thing I see is a tourist stand with postcards of the most pornographic things you can ever imagine, like a man's penis made up to look like a dog, you know, with floppy ears, and you know, a vagina with with vampire teeth in it. And I'm thinking, you know, if there had been a Saudi boy of 18 years old who got on that plane in Dahran, and this is the first thing he saw of the West, I mean, his whole mind would explode. I mean, coming from a conservative Wahhabi culture, to see this as his first taste of the West, I mean, yeah, we don't want him to come to America to see quite the same kind of thing if we can. But I mean, you know, the world is extremely diverse, but you know, most people know something about America. But it's you know, the more we can teach people about America and what a great place this is. I mean, even with all our major flaws, including in the last couple of weeks, again, this is where everybody wants to come.
Well, thank you, Richard. And I've heard that so many times. This is the place, no matter what's going on in our country, this is still the place people want to come. You know, we hear often that America is the greatest country in the world. And I'm reminded of a story told to a father to an 8-year-old boy who asked his dad, am I the greatest 8-year-old boy that ever lived? And the dad said, well, first of all, there's no such thing as the greatest 8-year-old boy who ever lived. And if there was such a thing, it wouldn't be you.
So I don't want to be too overly prideful about America. First of all, any other developed country has a much better healthcare system than we do.
Yes.
It covers everybody. You're not going to ruin your life. You don't spend your whole life saving money for your kids to go to college either in Belgium or Britain or France or Germany or any of these places, or Japan. So I mean, we are a great country. I'm highly patriotic, but we don't do everything perfectly by any means.
Right. And you made a mention of you kind of wish, and some of the work you do is trying to educate foreign people, their culture about America. We need that same education in America.
We do.
Yes.
We do.
All right. So I thank you, Richard. And if we can give Richard a round of applause, please. I really
very much.
appreciate your time. You've been
Happy
been
to.
fascinating to me. I love the subject matter. You're right up my wheelhouse. I find you. And David, maybe you can hook up with Richard and get him to,
I
come up
intend
your
to.
class.
I want him to come to one of my classes this semester.
Yeah,
so,
that'd be
I'd love to.
fantastic.
yeah, I
Thank you.
have your email. Carrie gave me your
Yeah,
email. So.
You do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is Carrie with us? Is she?
Yeah.
She
Mark?
left. She was, but she's not out of the room now.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. What I was going to do is ask her to, or is Jeanette here? Maybe Jeanette can speak to our next month's meeting. If not, we can just pay attention to the website, pay attention to our meetup groups, and all of that information will be coming through emails and all of the publicity that we send out. There's lots of good things happening as we move forward into 2021. Things can
Well-
only get better if we make a difference, and we are here to try to do that. And I appreciate everybody in this room. I appreciate the First Coast Free Thought Society. Richard, thank you so much. And if there's no other comments, I'm going to conclude the meeting right now. Thank you all.
Fantastic.
Very much. Take care.
Bye all.
I do,
You're on. We're unmuted.
Ken,
Yes.
I do know that Carrie sent me that we've got a representative
Got-
speaker for March,
back.
but I don't,
Well, I'm
okay.
here.
oh,
here.
Carrie's back. Okay,
Next
good.
month.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We'll all learn it. I was going to ask Carrie to speak to next month's meeting.
Well, here,
She's
here, I
here.
shall.
Oh,
Next
okay.
month's meeting will be a representative from the American Humanist Association who will update us on their various doings and talk about an upcoming conference of theirs.
Okay.
That's good.
And since
Thank
we are a sister organization, we are affiliated with the AHA, it's going to be really good.
Thank you. Thank you,
Great.
Carrie.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Thanks for all you do. I appreciate it. I'm going to say good night now. Enjoy
Good night.
yourselves. Bye-bye.
Night,
Bye-bye.
night.